Welcome back to another episode of the Fine Food Freedom Podcast. Today we're talking all things social events in the summer, or summer social events, I guess you could say. Barbecues, cookouts, bonfires, beach days, pool days, graduation parties, you name it, it's here. Boat days, if you're so lucky. I haven't been on a boat in years. That actually sounds really nice. So if anybody wants to invite me on a boat, slide in my DMs. But anyways, seriously, I do a lot of Q&As on Instagram, right? Where I'll just say, ask me anything. And I get a lot of questions. Again, you can sub in any social event. It could be a party, again, bonfire, beach day, barbecue, graduation party, all the things this summer, wedding. And so I haven't done an episode like this in a while where I really want to call it like summer social event safety kit, I guess you could say, of like what's going to keep you safe at social events regarding your relationship with food. And first of all, please know there's no right way to do intuitive eating. So this is not about just following these 10 steps and everything's going to be wonderful. Although I wish it were that easy. But what I want to do is just offer you some tips or invite you into these tips if you think that they'll be helpful for you. So if you find that you have a lot of obsession around food or counting calories or macros or portion sizes, you've dieted for what feels like your entire life, and now you're starting to walk away from that, and you're definitely feeling an increased stress or anxiety regarding some social events coming up, I think this episode could be a great, great tool for you to just keep in your back pocket. And again, take what serves you and leave the rest behind, because remember that this is a podcast. This is for informational and educational purposes only. This is not a substitute for professional support. Although I am a registered dietitian and certified intuitive eating counselor, I don't know you personally, right? There's thousands of people that download these episodes. And so I'm just going to spitball a bunch of tips that are going to work for some people, right? And then other tips might not work for you and might work for others. And so it's all about taking what serves you and leaving the rest behind. So let's get into it, right? So let's say you got a social event coming up. Again, it could be anything. It could be a beach day, a wedding, a vacation, a barbecue, a graduation party. You have this event that you know that there's going to be food there. You don't have control over what food's going to be served. You don't have control over, is it a buffet, right? Is it a plated meal? Like there's so many things up in the air. And that can be really, really stressful if you're coming from a place of restriction for a really long time. And so I'm going to offer you some tips that are just going to make it as stress-free as possible. So first of all, I think it's important to recognize that there are some things that we can do before the event to make ourselves feel more pleasant physically, mentally, emotionally. So one of the biggest signs, people always ask me, how do I know if I'm actually like if I'm hungry? And one of the biggest signs of hunger is actually thinking about food all of the time. So if you're someone who is obsessed about food, like when's my next meal? When am I eating? What am I eating? How much am I eating? Where am I getting it? Like if you feel like you are nonstop hamster wheel of obsessing about food, there's a good chance that you're not getting enough food. So before any social event, again, if possible, please know that there's so much nuance to this because we're talking about a made up social event. We don't know what this social event is. But if possible, can we consistently feed ourselves? Can we consistently nourish ourselves before going to this event? So let's pretend that we are going to an outlet. Let's set the scene, right? Let's pretend you and I, we are going to a dated function. You are my plus one. We are going to a wedding, a summer beach wedding. Oh, this is fun. I wish we were really going. So we're going to a wedding, right? Let's say the ceremony is at 5 p.m. Okay. Then we got a cocktail hour. Then we got a reception. So, and again, you can sub in any social event, right? I'm just trying to paint the picture. So we have this ceremony at 5 p.m. So we got a whole day. So let's go back to diet culture version of Sammy. When I used to have a wedding at 5 p.m. or any event at 5 p.m., I would starve myself all day because I'd say, okay, I'm going to try to be as small as possible. I don't want to be bloated. I want to be really good today, using heavy air quotes. And I would starve myself. And then I would say, okay, I'm going to be different this time. I'm going to be good. I'm not going to be bad. I'm going to be in control. I'm only going to eat the salad and the vegetables. Like, I would do this. I can't tell you how many times I've done this. So what actually happens? Well, when you don't eat all day, guess what? You're pretty fucking hungry. And I would eat everything in sight. And then I would drop those walls down and I would say, fuck it. I'm going to eat everything because I deserve it. And tomorrow I won't be eating carbs ever again for the rest of my life. So I'm going to eat as much as I can tonight. I would feel physically uncomfortable. It would ruin the present moment because my stomach would hurt. I would get extra bloated because I didn't eat all day and then gave my body a large amount of food in one sitting. So there would be a lot that goes with that. And then I would start to get in my head about like, I'm so bad. How could I do this? I'm such a horrible person, etc. So I want to bring awareness to, if you have an event, right? We have this beach wedding that you and I are going to, 5 p.m. We have a whole day to nourish our bodies. And some of you might be like, Sammy, that's not the event. The event's at 5 p.m. Can we talk about that? But how we set ourselves up for that event is going to, it's almost more important than the event itself, truly. So I want you to recognize that your body wants and needs consistent nourishment all day long. I want you to think about a time that maybe you went greater than 5 or 6 hours without eating. What happened when you got in front of food finally? Did you feel like it was like, oh, I'm hungry? Or were you like, I'm going to fucking eat all of this, eat it so fast, and then eat more because I'm so hungry? Guess what? Congratulations. If you chose option B there, your body works properly. That's just called being really hungry. And so as events come up this summer, we are not focusing on starving ourselves, right? We're leaving that in the diet culture past version of us. We are focusing on nourishing ourselves and fueling ourselves for these events. I want you to think about eating breakfast, snack, lunch, snack, maybe even another snack on the way to the ceremony at 5 p.m., right? Our fake ceremony together. Because we know that, hey, we got to sit through this hour-long ceremony. We don't know what hors d'oeuvres are going to be served at cocktail hour, right? So we don't know when we're going to get in front of food again. We don't know what the food's going to look like. So let's make sure we're pretty consistently fed and nourished. So we're good to go. Now, again, shit happens, right? Life happens. Maybe you have a crazy day and you're running late and traffic hits and you can't feed yourself. It's okay, right? We're not going to guilt ourselves or judge ourselves like if we can't consistently feed ourselves. But if we can set that up before the event, that's going to be super helpful. So let's say we do that and 5 p.m. we get there, ceremony lasts an hour. It's a beautiful beach wedding. The sun is right above us. It's setting as cocktail hour hits. And we get to cocktail hour and we consistently fed ourselves, but we say, you know what? Some of these things look really great. Maybe their cocktail hour is one of the best you've ever been to. And there's just a buffet. And I've been to weddings like this where they have like Italian station, right? They have Asian cuisine, of some of the most amazing dishes. They have like a Mediterranean Greek cuisine station. I've been like where it has every single type of cuisine that you could ever imagine. That can be really overwhelming because now it's like, I don't know what I want. So these are tips that I'm going to give you that can be helpful. First of all, it's important to regulate yourself. So if your let's say siren starts sounding of, oh my gosh, there's so much food around. I feel out of control. I'm nervous. This is a lot. This is very overwhelming. I want you to take a deep breath. And I want you to say, I'm safe. I am safe. I want you to also say to yourself, I have unconditional permission to eat. We start to urgently eat and eat everything and don't slow down and don't get present when we're trying to fit things in that we, air quotes, shouldn't be having. So it's important to remind yourself and your nervous system that I am safe and I have unconditional permission to eat whatever I want at this cocktail hour, whatever I want at this reception, whatever I want at this barbecue, graduation party, you name it. And once we do that, it becomes a lot easier because then I call it take a lap. I do this everywhere I go. When there's unlimited food, I take a lap. I do a little assessment. I say, okay, what do we got here? Right? What does mama want to eat? And so I'll just take a lap and just kind of assess. I don't have a plate in my hand. I'm just looking. Now, of course, like this might not be possible at some events where they have like lines and you can't see the food. And I get it. But when you can, take a lap. Look at the food. Start to see what's making you salivate. Maybe you see, let me give some examples. Maybe you see a creamy, ooey gooey mac and cheese, and instantly, like you see saliva, you feel saliva forming in your mouth, and you're like, oh my God, that looks so good. Great. Mental note. We want that mac and cheese. Maybe you see, I don't know, I don't know what's coming up for me. Let's say a Brussels sprout slaw. It's like a crunchy Brussels sprout broccoli slaw. And you're like, that's looking good. That's looking good. That crunch sounds good, right? Crunchy texture. Okay, great. Maybe you see like a typical spring salad and you're like, it looks very colorful. It looks, wonderful. It looks aesthetically pleasing, but it's just not what I want right now. It's just like, okay, great. Mental note. So you kind of get to walk through and just see what's coming up for you. What sounds good? What looks good? Then all of the food that's there because I can't tell you, before I used to do this, right? You're at these big events. There's so much food. You take a plate and you just start putting everything on your plate. And then you're not even halfway through all of the food. And you're like, I don't even have room on my plate. And then you get to the end of the food line and you're like, oh my gosh, that's what I want. I really want that. I don't even want this anymore. So that just helps you take assessment of what food is around. Again, you well know that you have unconditional permission to eat all of the food. You can get as many plates as you want. So it's not about portioning, your food intake. It's about just seeing what's there. Now, once we do that, I like to go with my first plate as more of a tasting, because here's why. Again, I've been to many food, events with food that maybe that mac and cheese did look really good, right? And maybe that broccoli Brussels sprout slaw did look really crunchy and refreshing and great. But then you get it on your plate and you take a bite of it and you're like, this is really underwhelming. My grandma's mac and cheese recipe is so much better than this, right? Or like my grandma's crunchy coleslaw or broccoli slaw recipe is so much better than this. Like, this is not that good. And guess what? Then you don't have to eat it. But where we run into trouble is when we, again, go right into the food line with a plate. We're piling things on our plate. We have all of this food. And then we take a bite of something and we're like, that's not even that good. And then there's sometimes, depending on how you grew up and how you were raised around food, you might find that you're like, oh, I actually feel this like responsibility to clear my plate and to eat all of these things because I put them on my plate and I don't want to waste food and I don't want to throw away food. And that's actually something we talk about later on in intuitive eating is the clean your plate club method and kind of how to undo some of that processing. But in the now, if you're at a social event, I invite you to just take 1 or 2 bites of a lot of different foods. Do your tasting and see what you actually want to eat. Because some things look aesthetically pleasing, they look visually appealing, they may make our mouth water at the thought of it. And then we actually are eating it and we're like, this isn't that good. This isn't meeting my expectations. And I really don't want this. I know I have unconditional permission to eat it. I could have 7 helpings of everything, but I don't want this. And that's a big part of food freedom that I think goes untalked about is people think that food freedom is saying yes to everything. That is not true. Food freedom is about being able to also say no to something when you don't want it and not feeling like you have to eat all of the things. And so this is, I can't tell you how many one-on-one clients I've sat with before an event, before a holiday, where we kind of game plan this process together of take a lap, assess what's there, then grab your plate, do a tasting round, see what you really want, then go back, get the food that you want. And I can't tell you how many times then we come together post-event and these clients will say, oh my gosh, that was a game changer because I ate what I actually wanted. And you may think, Sammy, I already know what I want. I'm always going to want the cake, the cookies, the mac and cheese, but you're going to surprise yourself. Your desires for food, what satisfies you is going to differ every single day, depending on what you ate earlier that day, what you had maybe that week, even like what you've had exposure to, the temperature outside, of course, the food availability and what food is being served. So there's so many different things that are going to play into what food you want that day. So you're going to really surprise yourself. I think once you have unconditional permission to eat, you know, hey, I'm allowed to have everything, but what do I actually want? And so once you're doing that tasting, right, we did our lap, then we did our tasting round where we have a plate. We're doing 1 to 2 bites of everything, seeing what we really like. We're kind of like judging it. This can be really fun if you share it with your +1 or if you're there with a family member, a loved one, a friend, because then you almost become, it's like your food judges, right? Like your judge. And again, not from like a judgmental, like rude place, but you get to talk about the food. What do you think about it? Okay, I would give it a 5. What would you give it? You know, I would give it a 7. Oh my gosh, that's really high. Why would you give it a 7? And it can become really, really fun. And again, I can't stress enough. This is totally advice of me saying, if this serves you, take it. If it doesn't serve you, leave it behind. You do not have to do this. So once you find out what meets your expectations, what you really want, then we go back around and we grab a full helping of all of the things that were really freaking amazing that we really, really wanted. You also might find that you took a tasting of, I don't know, what should we use as an example? Scalloped potatoes, right? You had 2 bites of them and you're like, and you go back and you're like, okay, they were good. I still want like another bite, but I think if I had another bite of these, I'd probably be satisfied. So maybe it's not even going back and taking full helpings or multiple helpings of something. It might be just be like, oh, you know what? I want like 1 more bite of this. And it's really, really cool once we trust ourselves to do this, because then it's so much easier to be satisfied. And again, I want to use examples of myself because I was a chronic dieter, that I remember versions of myself going to these said events that we're talking about, right? Going to a reception, going to a cocktail hour that had buffet style food, that I would load up on plates of what I thought I should be eating, heavy air quotes. So the veggies, right? Maybe it was like sauteed veggies, grilled veggies, raw veggies, fruit, and, maybe a chicken skewer. And again, nothing wrong with these foods. I love all of these foods to this day, but I would never allow myself like a lo mein or a fried rice or an egg roll or a chicken parm or, a lasagna, because I wasn't allowed to eat that food. And so I would force myself into choosing things that I didn't actually want. I was only choosing them because I thought it was the air quotes healthiest option. I thought it was the best option. I thought that I was being good if I was eating these foods. And then what would happen is I would try to eat those foods as long as possible. And of course, the night would unravel. As soon as I, would get some alcohol into my system as well, then my judgment would be skewed. And I would start to get into this really self-sabotage area, or self-sabotage version of myself where I would choose all of the things. So it's really, really important to recognize that if you are going to any event this summer, you have unconditional permission to eat. And I'll often get, so many questions of, well, how do I know what I want? And I understand that can be a really, really confusing question when for 20 plus years, you've only been choosing foods because you felt like you should, or you have to, or it's the healthier version, or it's a thing you have to eat. But it can be as simple as what sounds good, what makes your mouth salivate when you look at it, what gets you excited when you look at it, what makes you go, ooh, when you're walking past it at a buffet. Let's start there. Let's allow ourselves to eat those foods. Another tip that I want to give, that this is, such a simple one, but it is very important to say the least, especially with summertime upon us and the heat. Stay hydrated. And again, this is not from like me shaking my finger at you saying, you better drink your water. You do whatever you damn want. But with the increase of heat, it is so important, especially at events, if you're outside, if you're dancing, if you're, having fun, stay hydrated. Hydration is such a beautiful thing because it helps our body digest and absorb the food that we eat. It helps our body stay energized. It helps us feel pleasant. So the more that we can increase our hydration, again, this could even be going back to during the day, before the event, but also at the event. It's also a really, really important thing to engage in. So, quick tip summary here, right? Fuel and nourish yourself before your summer events. Hydrate before your summer events. When you're at the event, take a lap, see what food is available. When you're at the event, after you take the lap, grab that plate, grab a tasting plate, taste it, evaluate it, judge it, give it a number, and then you go back and say, what do I want more of? Right? What do I want to enjoy? What tastes good? What do I want to feel and experience? And how is my food going to add to this event? So as we close out this episode, please know that, yes, we talked a lot about summer events tonight, but you can use this, you can flag this episode for any social event out there. And it's so important to recognize that, again, take what serves you, leave the rest behind. None of this is mandatory. None of this is something you have to do. This is simply for those who, the hundreds of DMs that we get of people saying, how do I go into an event and feel pleasant? How do I go into an event and stop stressing about food? How do I go into an event and be present and enjoy it? And I will never, ever forget this quote that a client said to me during a session. We worked together for a while, and she came back from a wedding where she was a guest of a wedding. And she said, Sammy, it's not intuitive eating. It's intuitive living. And she shared that with me because she was so present at the event. She danced the night away. She met people that she never would have met before because the old version of herself would sit at a table, gorge on food, feel unpleasant, be afraid to talk to anyone. And after walking through intuitive eating, she was able to fuel and nourish herself before the event, enjoy the food at the event, dance and be present, put herself out there and talk to others. And so this is just such a beautiful example of intuitive eating is so much more than eating. Once you make peace with food, once you recognize that food is neutral, once you nourish your body and drop the morality associated to food, you get to enjoy life and recognize that it was never about the food. And so I want to challenge you this summer, whatever event that you have coming up, barbecue, grad party, wedding, bonfire, beach day, plan ahead. Choose to fuel yourself. Choose to nourish yourself. We're not starving ourselves anymore. We're leaving that diet culture version of us behind. And make sure that if you listen to this episode and take any of the tips out of it, to send me a DM on Instagram at find.food.freedom. Let me know what tip you found most helpful. Let me know what tip you implemented that really made a difference at your event. And also, if you're listening to this episode right now and you're like, this was so helpful, I need more, please, please, please head on over to findfoodfreedomresources.com. Again, that's findfoodfreedomresources.com, and you will find so many different resources there. We have free trainings, we have monthly membership, we have group coaching, one-on-one coaching, all of the things. So if you want more podcast episodes, you want more content, you want more tips, again, you can find all of that over at findfoodfreedomresources.com.